Hi everyone, my name is Saba Khalid, and today the topic that I'll be discussing is community resiliency during climate change. Before I get started, I wanted to tell you a little bit about myself. I started out my academic career as an electrical engineer. I got my bachelor's and master's in electrical engineering and in power systems. From then on, I moved on to working at GE Energy for about 4-ish years, where I was in various facets and roles within GE Energy's businesses. This entailed working as a design engineer, and most recently was the stint as a substation engineer for battery storage plants. The last 4 years, I have been working at West Monroe, where I've been a management consultant within the energy and utilities practice. And my day to day currently involves working hand in hand with utilities to kind of identify their strategic initiatives as well as roadmap their future priorities. So I would like to take some time to now set the stage in terms of some key stakeholders within this conversation. First one I wanted to mention is FEMA, which is the Federal Emergency Management Association. And for those who are unaware, this is a federal body that is responsible for helping a state or territory recover from a natural disaster. You may be familiar with FEMA, especially if you're aware of Hurricane Katrina that occurred in 2007, which completely wrecked the town, not even the town, but the state of Louisiana, and New Orleans was really dramatically affected. This is an important entity because they are critically responsible for helping a state or territory recover from any natural disasters. They are a federal entity, so they are administering federal funds, and they sometimes assist states in getting recovered, especially after um, a situation like a natural disaster. One of the other entities to also keep in mind are actually insurance companies. Insurance companies are super critical because if there is ever a natural disaster, homeowners can submit claims to recover funds in order to recuperate their costs based on the damages that have occurred. Um, Famously, if you think of like insurance companies that are coming after a hurricane and homeowners can submit claims, that's the homeowner is able to recover the funds to repair any damages that may have occurred, and insurance companies are providing that. Actually, interestingly, now we're seeing cases where insurance companies are backing out of insuring certain states or areas. Most famously is the Florida situation right now, where insurance companies are refusing to insure parts of Florida or even some state, probably the whole state of Florida, because of how much the cost of these claims are going to get and how increasing frequency it is. So much so that even though there are some expensive insurance policies for these homeowners and they're willing to pay, insurance companies are just not seeing a return because of the number of natural disasters that are happening. In the summer of 2023 has shown, but in the current number of states so far that have cleared disasters, um, it has only been exponentially rising. 90% of United States counties have already declared a disaster this year. And in the estimated damage right now is assumed to be $120 billion that is attributed directly to climate change. Furthermore, this damage is expected to reach up to 2 trillion by the end of the century. So climate change is not something that is happening only temporarily. It's only going to lead to an increase in storms, which is why there has been an emphasis on mitigation. Another entity to think about is actually utilities. Utilities are critical components as they are actually the ones providing this critical services for everyone, which sometimes include electricity, water, and gas, and also sewage. But these are critical entities because not only providing these services that are considered rights for most of the residents across the U.S., but they are also the ones who are primarily affected when there are natural disasters and being able to withstand the effects of those storms. One of the things to think about if you have is like an electric utility providing power to your house. If there's pole damage, which is most common, they're feeling more stress as they need to make their the grid more resilient. This is the area where I'm working in with the utilities a lot, and I'll mention some examples later. Um, as we're talking about this on this trend of climate change being one of the critical situations where we're facing, um, there is response happening where their states and the world is really looking to desperately switch over to clean energy and decarbonize, so the future effects of the of climate change can be mitigated. But these are not only only entities that are in play, but these are the ones that I will just highlight and talk about. And there will be a critical component that will involve how you can be also involved in establishing some resiliency components within your communities. So now I want to spend some time just describing climate change and the history around it. So first of all, let's define climate change. So climate change refers to long-term shifts in temperatures and weather patterns. Such shifts can be natural due to the changes in sun's activity or large volcanic eruptions. But since the 1800s, human activities have been the main driver of climate change, primarily due to the burning of fossil fuels like coal, oil, and gas. The burning fossil fuels generates greenhouse gas emissions that act like a blanket wrapped around the earth, trapping the sun's heat and raising temperatures. Now, one of the things just to keep in mind is that climate change was um, first body that was created as a part of formation of scientists globally. It's actually a United Nations body, was formed in 1988. And this body, known as the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, has been with government entities in order to understand what climate change is, what are the impacts, as well as how to mitigate it, and what are some solutions that companies are deploying in order to be able to reduce the effects of climate change and also figure out policies that may be more effective. As some may know, has led to an annual conference, and this year's annual conference is called the COP28, and it's happening in United Arab Emirates. That United Arab Emirates is hosting it this year. The first global policy around this, or most famously, is the Kyoto Protocols, which were signed in 1997, which were the first ones to account for signing for committing to reducing the greenhouse gas emissions by each country. However, these were not as effective, which led to the Paris Agreement, which is one that outlined specific targets for each country as well to reach to the 1.5 degree reduction level, which is identified by this entity. But that was the purpose of these agreements, was to let countries be the leaders in reducing their greenhouse gas emissions, and they are the ones that are responsible for outlining and creating these environments. Unfortunately, there has been limited progress in reaching those goals that were outlined in not only the Kyoto Protocols, but also the Paris Agreement. And as we have noticed globally, storms have only been getting worse. And most recently, if you're local to New York City, you may have seen Hurricane Sandy, Hurricane Irma, which actually FEMA was deployed for Hurricane Sandy for recovery for Long Island, as well as New Jersey. Just from this summer, the immense flash floods that New York City experienced, and it's only likely to get worse. Um, it's important from this perspective to understand that because we have known about climate change since 1988, there have been measures in place to have opportunities to respond and mitigate this. However, based on the progress of those initiatives, those have been very limited in curtailing these impacts and effects. So now there is an urgency that has been kind of signaled all around the world as these storms are only getting worse to be able to develop and deploy technologies that are at a higher scale in order to be able to provide um, us a chance in order to become this resilient community, become this hope in order to be able to we can't prevent climate change at this point. However, how we respond to it and how we can rationalize it, there is some areas here. More so as there's not only just one stakeholder, as mentioned before, utilities are working on deploying grid resiliency plans. They are also looking at hardening the grid in order to be able to make sure assets are the critical assets that everyone relies on are still be able to provide it or recover quickly. States are creating climate playbooks in order to be able to prepare for these situations where there's going to be increasing disasters, having first responders, disaster response guidelines ready. It's a playbook that also the federal government is looking to build. But the other thing that is the most important is realizing that because these storms are becoming less predictable, it's only going to get harder first before it gets easier in terms of entities being able to understand how the patterns come in and how to also understand if there are such situations that are escalating, how do you respond or turn around quickly and requiring that variability to be able to do so. I'll also mention Con Ed has already published a goal on their grid resiliency online, and it's taking a novel approach in identifying responding to the events caused by climate change. More so, there are other agencies and other entities that are looking into this and really reviewing how disaster planning from this holistic perspective. What is something that as a community that can we do? So, as mentioned before, there is hope. It's not the end, and it can all seem very doom and gloom that climate change is upon us. It's gonna sit tight. It can't do anything. I think it's actually the opposite of where I stand. Um, I started in this industry about 8 years ago, if you don't count my internships or even my academic career and just pure interest in power systems and energy. Um, it's it's not it's not the end in the sense that because there has been so many missteps in the past and that the future is paying for it now is that this is a trajectory that can be turned, and it can be changed. um, but however, it does require some pretty cohesive work in terms of not only working with your local communities, but also your government entities and your political prowess, as well as financial support. But one of the things that I wanted to kind of leave you all with was this idea of what can I do? What can I start doing tomorrow? And it's going to sound really dumb, and it may be like, oh, I can just start doing food composting. That's a big deal in New York City. Queens and Brooklyn have started composting. Public for all houses, neighborhoods, you can request that. But the thing is, these are incremental steps that can lead to behavioral changes within our overall system. Climate change is not just attributed to one or two areas for greenhouse gas emissions. If you're not a CEO of a company that is emitting a lot of these emissions, you will feel like you have little impact. But one of the biggest conversations is how to normalize how you think about climate change and what you can do. So even like doing a simple thing as taking your natural food waste and putting it out for compost, that can be done, in like a minute. It doesn't have to be something you have to think about twice, but just normalizing that creates a culture that we are trying to create a sustainable lifestyle and that everything is connected. Another more active efforts is joining these working groups that cities are maybe putting together and how you think about it for the blueprint of communities. Who are your centers when there are extremes events going on? If there is extreme heat event, where are the cooling centers? If there is anything that's coming from flash floods, how do you provide recovery? How do you provide skills or trades where you can actually organize groups? For example, one of the community organizations I'm part of is called the Queen Solid Waste Advisory Board that really focuses on community issues to help people who are interested or are local presence in their community to come out and share opinions with a advisory board that goes to the Queensborough president. But it's not only located for Queens, it's for all five boroughs, and everybody interacts with each other. one of the things that they're doing in the next couple of weeks is pumpkin smash to talk about food waste and food composting. Because pumpkins go to waste, it creates this whole issue. It only adds to landfills and only releases to greenhouse gas emissions. So again, there are certain ways to get involved. The other portion is just understanding how to prepare for these storms. It is not that simple. There are certain precautions that you can take. There are evacuation orders that they follow. Do not try to say determine, do not be your own meteorologist or an expert of saying I can withstand the storm, therefore I'm going to stay here. You must follow what they are providing because no one can predict how bad something can get. So it is better to take that precaution versus go ahead of it. However, this does not mean you go into a panic. It's just to follow. The more you can learn about these events, the more you can participate in these conversations, the better you will be informed. The one thing that I just wanted to end on, I know community resiliency sounds like there will be this really great framework where we identify 5 key points and this is what you need to do in order to just feel resilient. There is no 5 major point plan that can lead to community resiliency, but just understanding those entities and stakeholders that are involved in contributing to the resiliency of your community is just the first step. The next step after that, as always, everybody talks about awareness is also just getting involved and understanding what is your role that can be contributed. Um, this can be a little bit hard to figure out, but I think the most important thing to keep in mind is knowing that there are certain skill sets that everyone has. So if you are a marketing person, just because marketing doesn't directly lead to climate change, creating very good informational graphics about this issue is a very critical component because science communication is kind of terrible at this point. Point being that every person has a way to read to that community resiliency, and it doesn't always have to entail in this tangible deliverable that you make, but it's something where you can kind of voice and start learning more about and getting more involved and only not only from a perspective of just knowing that these things exist, but also seeking these things out. For example, if you're attending this conference, it's a great way of understanding some of the key issues that are coming up, not only in climate change, but also sustainability. So I wanted to just thank you for your time and paying attention even up to this point. I know it was not ideal in terms of it being recorded, but I appreciate you listening and hopefully you learned something out of it. Thank you so much.